You've seen it, right? Driving out in the country, you pass a farm, and there's someone spraying crops in a full-on hazmat suit. We're talking head-to-toe protection, a respirator, the whole deal. And you've got to wonder, if it's that dangerous for the person spraying it, what happens when that exact same chemical ends up in our food? Well, today, we're going to try to make sense of all that.
Okay, so let's just start with this number, 87%. According to CDC data, that's the percentage of American kids with the weed color glyphosate in their urine. And it's not just kids. 80% of adults tested positive too. I mean, this stuff is in our bread, our cereal, oatmeal, even our beer and wine. So how did a chemical that's basically everywhere become the center of such a huge storm?
And this is where the whole story just gets bizarre. You've got two of the biggest, most respected scientific bodies in the world, the EPA and the World Health Organization. They're both looking at the exact same scientific data, and yet they come to completely opposite conclusions. The EPA says it's not likely to cause cancer. The WHO says it's a probable carcinogen. I mean, how is that even possible?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How can this be? Who are we supposed to believe? Well, it turns out a federal court case from 2022 looked right into this mess. And what they found, it helps clear things up a little.
Okay, let's get into this court case. So back in 2022, a federal appeals court decided to take a really hard look at the EPA's official safety ruling on glyphosate. And they didn't just review it, they were about to deliver a massive blow to the agency's credibility.
So here's the kicker. The court didn't just disagree with the EPA. It threw out the entire safety review, completely invalidated it, told the agency to go back to the drawing board and do it all over again. They pretty much said, your homework isn't good enough. But why?
Now, get this. These phrases on the screen aren't just summaries. These are the court's actual words. The judges said the EPA's conclusion was not supported by substantial evidence. They said the agency was divorced from its own guidelines, which is a nice way of saying the EPA literally ignored its own rulebook for how to evaluate this stuff. The court called them out for a disregard of tumor results and said their logic had inconsistent reasoning. I mean, that is a takedown.
And this part is just, it's almost hard to believe. The EPA knew that farmers are spraying Roundup, right? Which is a whole cocktail of chemicals, not just pure glyphosate. And research shows that whole formula is more toxic. For millions of farmers, the #1 way they get exposed is through their skin. And yet, the EPA never even bothered to measure how much gets absorbed that way. They just skipped one of the most basic safety tests imaginable.
So how could a safety review be this flawed? The source material we're looking at suggests that to really get what went wrong with the science, you have to follow the people. And this is where the story gets really personal.
The source points to what it describes as a revolving door between the government regulators and Monsanto, the company that invented Roundup. For instance, there's an EPA official named Jess Rowland. He allegedly stopped another government agency from doing its own glyphosate investigation. Then, after he retired, he went to work as a consultant for one of Monsanto's firms. Then you have Linda Fisher, who went from being an EPA administrator to a VP at Monsanto and then came back to the EPA as a deputy administrator. And apparently, it's the same pattern with Michael Taylor, going back and forth between Monsanto and the FDA.
This might be the most powerful part of the whole story. Those are the words of Marion Copley, a toxicologist who worked at the EPA for 30 years. As she was dying from cancer, she wrote a letter to her old colleague, that same Jess Rowland. She begged him, laying out 14 different ways glyphosate causes tumors, and saying it's essentially certain that it does. Her letter ended with that quote you see on the screen. She passed away just a few months later.
And the story doesn't end there. The source also points to court documents that allege Monsanto employees actually ghostwrote key safety studies. So you have this huge study from the year 2000 that's been used over and over again as proof that glyphosate is safe. Well, these documents suggest that Monsanto's own people wrote big chunks of it, then just had it published under the names of other scientists to make it look independent. But hold on, because here's the part of the story that the source says could be the most important piece of all. It goes way beyond the cancer debate and into something that's happening inside pretty much all of us. Okay, quick science lesson, but stick with me because this is key. For years, the main argument for glyphosate safety was based on something called the shikimate pathway. Just think of it like an internal factory that plants use to make stuff they need to live. Glyphosate works because it's like a wrench thrown into that factory's machinery. It gums up the works and the plant dies.
So the argument was simple. It's safe for people because our human cells don't have this pathway. No factory, no problem. Case closed, right? Well, here's the little detail that the source claims was conveniently left out of the sales pitch. Our human cells might not have that pathway, but our gut bacteria, they absolutely do. Trillions of them.
And this is a massive deal. The source claims that glyphosate basically acts like an antibiotic in our guts, but it's a weird one. It harms the good guys, the beneficial bacteria that help run our immune system and make vitamins. And what's really wild is that a lot of the pathogenic or bad bacteria are actually resistant to it. So the chemical is wiping out our internal allies while giving the bad guys an open field to take over.
So after billions of dollars in lawsuit payouts, the story takes another twist. In 2023, Bayer, the company that now owns Monsanto, quietly pulled glyphosate out of the residential Roundup you'd buy at your local hardware store.
So that sounds like a win, right? Problem solved? Well, the obvious next question is, what's in the bottle now, and, is it actually any safer?
Well, according to the source material, the answer to that question is a resounding no. The new formulas use a chemical called diquat. And when you look at chronic toxicity, that's the harm from long-term exposure, the data is pretty shocking. This chart shows diquat is considered up to 200 times more chronically toxic than glyphosate. It's linked to things like liver and kidney damage.
And the list of concerns just keeps going. The source points out that this new stuff is classified as a highly hazardous pesticide. It's so risky, it's already banned in the entire European Union and in China. It's more toxic to wildlife, bees, birds, fish, and it's more likely to seep into our groundwater. And maybe the craziest part? The bottle on the shelf looks almost exactly the same as the old one, with no new warnings telling you about any of this.
Okay, so after all that, which is a lot, the most important question is, what can any of us actually do about it? The source offers some pretty practical advice for anyone who's concerned.
First, it says to buy organic when you can. Organic certification rules ban glyphosate. It's especially important for things like wheat and oat products, since those crops are often sprayed right before they're harvested. Second, focus on building back your good gut bacteria. Eat more fermented foods like kefir, yogurt, and sauerkraut to support your microbiome. And finally, if you really want to know where you stand, the source says you can actually get your urine tested to see what your personal exposure levels are.
And that really brings us to the end here. The whole story of glyphosate is just this huge reminder that what we think is safe today might have a completely different story tomorrow. As companies keep changing their formulas and the regulators are called into question, it kind of leaves the biggest challenge to us, doesn't it? How are we supposed to navigate this world when it's just so hard to know what's truly safe?